Professional services is one of those sectors which is very diverse. And when it comes to exporting professional services, probably the single biggest factor that makes an impact is whether or not the service is regulated. So we tend to operate a three-step process when we're helping our clients to understand if they can continue to operate services post-Brexit. And the first question we always ask is, has your regulatory environment changed? And if the answer is yes, that will have a knock-on impact on what format you can export and how and when you export. So I'm not surprised to see that this particular group has 75% exporting services. I think if you were to do a similar poll with auditors or lawyers, you'd get a much lower number because the regulatory barriers force them into particular business forms and models. But if we can turn to trade more generally, both in the context of how it impacts on our clients and how it impacts on our businesses, then I think Richard really summed it up right at the start of the poll, in which he said trade is changing. And that has never been more true now today than it ever has been. And unfortunately, for the first time in about 80 years, we find ourselves in an environment where trade is getting harder. We'd got used to a world in which trade, in the very broadest sense of tariffs, non-tariff barriers, at border barriers and behind border barriers, we'd got used to the idea that all of that was becoming easier because the experience of the 70 years following World War II told us that that was the case, that supranational bodies and member governments were all of them working to reduce trade barriers and therefore reduce cost and reduce risk for business. It felt like an unstoppable trend. However, what the past 10 years have shown us is that that trend first slowed and then stopped and is now actually reversed. So trade is now getting harder for all businesses globally. The waters in which they swim are getting colder and the currents are getting stronger. And we see that in digital and technology. We see it in sustainability, in the trade wars that President Trump kicked off, but which have continued nevertheless. We see it in the undermining of the international systems, such as the WTO appellate body and the collapse of plurilateral negotiations. And we see it in the servicification of the economy, which means that the previous liberalizations in goods trade have less of an impact on businesses now. Now, that's the global picture, but it is particularly true for UK businesses. And that's because UK businesses have not had to consider trade for the past 40 or so years. It was devolved, in effect, to the European Commission and then the European Union. So what does that mean, most importantly for our clients? It means that they need to get nimble and agile when it comes to trading matters. If I could break it down into the consultant's typical 3 steps, first of all, businesses need to acknowledge that this is a change, that the trend of trade easements has reversed, and that trend of reversal is likely to continue for the next 10 to 20 years as geopolitics leads the way. Secondly, UK businesses in particular need to learn the language of trade. We find typically that when we're talking to government, they have one lexicon, that commercial businesses have a second lexicon, and those two don't meet in the middle or barely meet at all. And I had this experience myself as a trade specialist when I started talking to companies about Brexit. And I'd bounce enthusiastically into meetings and say to businesses, so tell me what your new market access barriers, restrictions are going to be. And the businesses are going, we don't know. We just do what we do, but we couldn't tell you what's going to change. And that was a real eye-opener for me, that just being a trade expert isn't enough. You need to be commercial at the same time and vice versa. So that's the second point, is learn the language of trade. There are all kinds of really, really helpful online resources, oftentimes free. If Richard would permit me, then after this webcast, I want to put a link to a couple of free resources to him so that he can share with you, but you don't have to pay a fortune for this stuff, or indeed at all. And then once you've learnt the language, you can start to help your clients to understand where they have exposures, where their market access barriers are going to change, and so their cost base is going to increase, as is their risk. And also, let's not forget this, where the opportunities might be. because there are inevitably opportunities here for a well-advised business. It's like the old joke about how do you escape from a bear in the woods? You run faster than your friend. You can be very successful in the world of trade if you're just a little bit better than your competitors. So bear that in mind. And then thirdly, and this is where the Managing Partners Forum can be really helpful to you, work out what you want to engage with government and other stakeholders on, because this is a very rapidly evolving environment. The UK government is crying out for engagement with business to understand where and how it can make things better. And any forum into which you can feed intel, which the government can use to formulate workable proportionate policies, is a real plus. So keep those three in mind: acknowledge the problem, learn the language, build capability and capacity so that you can understand and help your clients. Those are the building blocks to success in the new world. Thank you, Rich.